Everyone has a little bit of that competitive spark in them, but some people step over the line to win, and today we'll see what happens when a Miran god does that. Let me tell you now that the repercussions are way worse than if a mere mortal did the same thing. Nevertheless, let's get into the video, shall we? I started and finished writing the competition on October 18th, 2019, so I actually wrote this one before The Vow, even though this myth comes after it in the Keisha's canon. It was my sixth finished story, whereas The Vow was number 13. With that out of the way, let's meet the cast. This is the first video featuring the fourth generation of gods and goddesses, the great-grandchildren of Aronach. This is also the first video in which Yamashet is not a main character. Instead, Luvi has taken Yamashet's place as one of the main characters. Two of Luvi's three children are also prominent in the story, to varying degrees. Dazgari, the Lord of the Night, and Aule, the God of Justice, are the two most heavily featured of Luvi's sons, although Cheka, the God of the Clergy, is also present in the story. The oldest child of Talib, his daughter Terula, also features prominently in the story. She is the goddess of music and song. Finally, the character at the center of the story, Akkad, the youngest child of Yamashet, who enters his role as the god of evil. There are several other minor characters, including Suma, Luvi's wife, Izunu, Akkad's wife, Cheka, Tule, the goddess of water, and Ushez, the god of alcohol. In addition to the gods are the Zukarulas, and an opposing force to the Zukarulas known as the Hairas, which just means demons in early New Korean. So, with that, we can get to the story. We start with Akkad approaching the notoriously shy Dazgari, challenging him to a songwriting competition. Dazgari usually isn't one for competing, but he feels confident enough this time to accept the challenge. Akkad states that Terula, the goddess of song, will judge the competition, and he walks off as Dazgari prepares for the showdown. That night, as Dazgari was watching over Keisha's, Akkad kidnaps Terula and ties her up with a rope, making her promise to declare him the victor over Dazgari. If she agreed, he would reward her, but if she refused to proclaim Akkad the victor or told anyone about the kidnapping, he threatened to replace her reward with something much more sinister. Frightened, Terula hastily agrees to declare Akkad the winner. Fast forward to the competition itself, and Terula is up on her pedestal, listening to the music, probably sweating profusely, while most of the pantheon spectates. Dazgari goes first, and the gods love his piece. To quote the text, it was decently long and very flowing. It was emotional, and the music played tricks with the ears. It was very harmonic, and produced in the mind images of ribbons and gold, intertwining with each other and mingling in the most beautiful way. Dazgari feels good about his chances, to say the least. Next, it's Akkad's turn. As much as the text praises Dazgari's music, it totally trashes Akkad's. Akkad's piece was much shorter and described as harsh and jabbing to the ears. Terula just about cries when she proclaims Akkad the victor, and the pantheon is thrown into chaos with this statement. Dazgari is extremely distraught since he finally put himself out there and was struck down, so he goes off to find a place to cry while Akkad rubs his victory in Dazgari's face. Terula does the same, going off to some secluded corner of Omet to cry as well. All of this happened during the day, so Luvi was not present for any of it. He finally finishes his ride across the sky, and when he gets back to Omet, he finds everybody freaking out. He runs to his son, who's surrounded by most of the pantheon, and tries to console him while Cheka recounts the events of the day. Luvi and Cheka go to find Terula, assuming she did what she did to humiliate Dazgari. They finally find Terula and she confesses, telling them about the kidnapping and how she didn't care about the reward, which she presumably hadn't gotten yet since Akkad and Izunu were parading around Omet celebrating their victory. Luvi and Cheka believe her and take her back to the throne room, where she recounts her tale and the gods take her word for it, nominating Aule to bring Akkad to justice for his crime. It's here that the text briefly deviates from the story of the gods to provide a glimpse of what's happening on Keisha's. Dazgari was too busy crying to show up in the night sky, so instead of a black sky with stars, the people of Keisha saw a static, gray, featureless sky. Understandably, many of them freaked out, with priests proclaiming the nearing of the end of the world and assuming the death of Yamashet. The stars were not the only things missing from Keisha's. The crops had begun to wither, since Sumat was consoling her son and not focusing on making the crops grow on Keisha's. The people's fears did not abate when their animal sacrifices and prayers went unanswered, and Luvi rode Umor across the sky in a fraction of the time he normally did in order to be present at the trial. The gods had already gathered in Alemau, the courtroom just below Omet, when Akkad and Izunu finally arrived. Here, Akkad's sarcastic style of speech is first introduced, when he says the following line to Yamashet upon entering Alemau. "Father, how lovely it is that we are afforded the privilege of seeing you today. How is it that we may serve you?" Yamcha is not impressed, in fact furious with his son, so he crankily orders Akkad to stand before Aule for the trial. The trial, predictably, does not go well, and Akkad not only denies any wrongdoing on his part, but he accuses Dazgari of trying to rig the competition. Eventually, Akkad storms out, enraged, and Yamcha stops Aule as he tries to follow him, ordering Aule to send Akkad to Ubejesh once he is apprehended. It is important to note here that, in the text, Yamachet's exact words are, "You will send him to Ubejesh, just as you have done to the unworthy souls of Keishas." This may seem confusing at first, since it is only in the next myth that death is introduced to the general populace of Keishas, but what Miran theologians have inferred from this statement is that the gods occasionally pulled a few people at a time off of Keishas for being exceptionally evil. Murder wasn't an option at this point, since nobody could die, so exceptionally evil encompasses anything that goes against the code of Aule, which includes theft, rape, apostasy, betrayal, etc. The murder clause was included later. This isn't important to the story at all, just a fun tidbit of world building I wanted to share. Anyway, back to the story. Akkad knew a battle was coming, so he and Izunu created a multitude of spirits known as the Hydras to oppose Yamachet's Zukarulas. The armies met on the central plains of Omet, and many Hydras were cast down to Ubejesh, seen as shooting stars by the people of Keishas on the still gray sky. The battle was one of truly biblical proportions, and the mythology actually gets somewhat muddled here. In The Fall of Aronak, it is stated that Laiduk and Maru will be guiding their Kazus for all eternity, but in the competition, the myth states that both of them die in this conflict. Since both myths are extremely old by Miran standards, it is impossible to tell which one is correct, so often priests simply assume that they're still alive. After watching the spirits battle for a while, the gods begin their own fight. Amazingly, Akkad and his wife somehow manage to fight off the pantheon, and Akkad starts daydreaming about sitting in Yamachet's throne. It is then that Dazgari emerges, previously not part of the fight, with his eyes shut tightly. Akkad and his wife start laughing at him and taunting him, saying, "The already defeated wishes to challenge me once again?" Dazgari opens his eyes and beams of white flame shoot out of them, scorching both Akkad and Izunu. Then he opens his mouth and screams, and the same white flame literally blindsides the evil duo. After they are thoroughly disoriented, Dazgari envelops them in a swirling cloud of darkness so they can't see. Aule picks them up and takes them to the edge of Omet, where he backhands them into Ubejesh with such force that Akkad and Izunu punch a hole through Keishas, which Tule has to plug up so the oceans don't drain. The people of Keishas, who happened to be looking up, saw an enormous black object hurtling towards Keishas. It collided with the ocean and sent a monumental earthquake through the land and swamped the shores with massive tsunamis. That's why the ocean between Dekabi and Rayami is called the Wounded Sea. The Pantheon recovers, having permanently disowned Akkad and Izunu, and Uches proposes they celebrate. The celebration turns into a 3-month-long party, and the gods start slacking on their duties. Sumat doesn't pay attention to keeping the land fertile, and Luvi starts riding across the sky faster in order to spend more time getting drunk. This means that Dazgari has to spend more time being the night sky, which he's totally fine with, since he doesn't really want to socialize. He still cries occasionally when he remembers how badly he was humiliated, which falls to Keishas as snow. Thus, the first winter occurred. That was probably a longer video, but I hope you've liked the content enough to have stuck around for the end. Next time, we'll learn about Akkad's revenge on the gods and the chaos that ensues. See you in the next one.